Hey everybody, my name is Alex with Hake Hardware, and in this video we are going to get a node set up on Windows 11 using the CLI. So there are some prerequisites here that we need to go over before we proceed. The first is you do need to have port 3333 and 3433 forwarded, and that's so you can make some peer connections. And I do have a port forwarding wiki, which just very briefly goes over what port forwarding is, typically how it's set up, and how to verify that your port is forwarded correctly, and some common problems. So if you're not familiar with port forwarding, check that guide out, and it should get you going in the right direction. And you also want to check and make sure that your system meets the system requirements, and you can check the official wiki here and make sure that you are good to run a node. Next, we'll cover my folder structure real quick before we get over into the Windows system. This is kind of subjective, and you may have a certain way you like to set up your folders, and that's totally fine. If you don't follow this, just make sure that in future commands there might be some adjustments and make those to the commands. So how I usually do it is I have an Autonomys folder, and then I'll create a subfolder for my node. And then whether you do a farmer or a cluster, you'll create a subfolder for that. And then if you do cluster, you'll create some subfolders to run the cluster. In this guide, we're only going to focus on the node. So let's jump into the Windows operating system. And the first thing that we're going to do is go to the subspace GitHub. And this is linked in the wiki, which is in the description of this video. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to look for the latest release. I'll make this a little bit bigger. And then scroll down, and there's a few different versions. You're going to pass all the farmers. You don't want the farmer. We're setting up the node. So, and we're setting up Windows, and then there's Skylake and V2. There's some descriptions on which build variant you should use for your system. I know that I'm going to be using the Skylake version, so I'm going to download that. And then I'm going to open up my downloads, cut, and then I will create the folders, which I forgot to do earlier. So I'll actually go to my C drive, users, my username, right click, then we'll do a new folder for Autonomys. Then I'll do a new folder for my node, and then I'll paste in my node executable that I'm going to be using. Now the next step is to make sure that we can run scripts on our computer. You don't have to do this, but I create a PowerShell script to run my node because I think it's a little bit easier to read and maintain, and honestly, it's just a cleaner way of executing the node. So what I usually do is I'll right-click just anywhere in this folder. Right-click on the Start menu down here, and then open up the terminal, but make sure it's the one that says Admin. And then there's a command that you can copy from the wiki, paste it in here, and what we're doing is setting the execution policy to remote signed. And what that means is you can run local scripts that are stored locally on your system just fine. So when we create our PowerShell script, we'll be able to run it. But if you were to download a script from the internet, it's going to be blocked unless you explicitly unblock it. And that is, of course, for security reasons. So I'm just going to hit that to set the execution policy. And then I'll close my console here. And then we're going to set up our script. So there's two ways that you can run a node and a farmer, or a node and a cluster. And one way is everything is local. So you could run your node and then you run a farmer and it's on the same host. And actually I'll jump over to the wiki here. So a local node, so there's going to be two versions of the script, a local node and a remote node. The local node just means your node and your farmer, or your node and your cluster, are all on the same computer. The remote node is if you are going to have your node on a separate computer than your farmer or your cluster. And there's just a slight difference in the script. So if we check out the local script here, you have the main command down here at the bottom. And there's not going to be a section that basically allows for connections from a remote farmer. So if we actually, what I really want to show you is the remote node, which has RPC listen on. So basically this is going to be listening on any IP address for a connection. So when our farmer attempts to connect to our node from a different computer, it's going to be able to accept that request. And then you need these two additional flags here to get everything working correctly. So you're going to make sure when you're going through this wiki that you either go to the local node or the remote node, depending on what your setup is. In this guide, we're going to be doing a local node, so I'm actually going to copy that link. Let's jump over into our system here, and we'll paste in this. And what we can do is just click this copy raw file. So we'll copy this script. We'll minimize our browser there. And then we'll open up Notepad. So we can just do the search menu here, Notepad, and we'll paste in that script. Now there shouldn't really be anything that you need to update in here other than the name. So you can put whatever you want. I'm going to leave Hey Hardware -tutorial. And then if you're on a later version or a newer version, make sure you update this .exe to be whatever you have in here. So you can just click it. If you click it again, you just copy that, and then you come in to your script here and just paste everything in before the .exe, and you'll have the latest version going. And now we can save this script to our folder. So we'll do File, Save As, and then we're going to find our node folder, and then we're going to name this node.ps1, and we're going to save as type all files, and then click Save. So if we close this, and we are now in our node directory again, we see we now have a node script here. And if you need to make edits, you can just double click it and it'll open in Notepad. And there's two ways to run this. So I think the easiest way is to right click and do run in PowerShell. However, if it fails, a lot of times you won't see the error that you get. So it's kind of frustrating. What you can do is right click, open in terminal, and then just type node and then hit tab, and you'll see it'll automatically complete with node.ps1. And now you can run this directly from the terminal, and if it fails, the terminal will stay open. There's also one more thing I want to cover. If you run this script and you don't get any errors, and basically there's no output, you may need to install Visual C++ Redistributable from Microsoft. So you can just click the link listed here and install it. It's usually pretty quick. Reboot your computer. You might not even need to reboot your computer, but it's a good idea to reboot your computer. And that should fix it. This is a requirement, and although most operating systems have it installed, you may not. Let's jump back to the operating system here. And if I did everything correctly, we should see this script kick off. And I'm just going to click Allow to allow for the connections. And we can see that we are now starting our node. So what's going to happen typically is we'll start to get some peers, we'll start to sync, and eventually we're going to see a big jump in our best number. So right now, maybe even for the next 10 minutes, we're going to be syncing 0 blocks per second. The target is the current block height. Best is where we're at. And we need to basically get our best to our target. There's something called a snap sync, which will occur eventually, and a bunch of the blocks will be synced, and that speeds up our syncing really quickly. Like nowadays, you should typically be able to sync fully in probably, I'd say, an hour or so. And then this warn, this is pretty normal. I get this almost every time I start my node. You can safely ignore that, and you might get a few of them. So the node's going to continue to sync, and if you check your node folder, you see you now have a network and a DB folder. You're going to want to keep those, don't delete them. That is where your node data is being stored and where the blockchain is being synced to. And you can see I'm quickly getting peers here as the ports are forwarded for this, and we should be able to start syncing pretty quickly. And that's it. So you'll just leave your node syncing. You can start with the farmer or the cluster without having your node fully synced, and then we'll make a connection between the farmer and the node, or if you're using a cluster, it'll be the controller and the node, and you'll be able to start plotting and farming and getting everything set up for the autonomous network. So hopefully this was helpful in getting your node set up on Windows. If you liked the video, feel free to leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.